Kahneman opens the final part of the book, Two Selves, by revealing that even our experience of happiness and life satisfaction is shaped by the same mental distortions that govern judgment and choice. He introduces a distinction that reshapes how we understand well-being: the experiencing self and the remembering self. The two selves perceive life differently, pursue different goals, and often contradict each other. What we remember as a good life may not be the one we actually enjoyed living. The experiencing self lives in the present. It feels sensations, emotions, and pain in real time, moment by moment. Its happiness depends on what is happening now. The remembering self, in contrast, is the storyteller. It reconstructs the past and decides how life went. It remembers snapshots, turning fleeting moments into a coherent narrative. The remembering self, not the experiencing one, makes decisions, forms opinions, and defines identity. Kahneman explains that memory does not record experience faithfully. Instead, it follows what he calls the peak-end rule. We remember an experience largely by its most intense moment, the peak, and its final moment, the end. Duration matters surprisingly little. A painful colonoscopy that ends gently is remembered as less unpleasant than a shorter one that ends abruptly, even if the total pain was greater. Memory edits experience to fit a story, and the story becomes our reality. This discrepancy between the two selves leads to what Kahneman calls the tyranny of the remembering self. The experiencing self lives each instant and quickly forgets. The remembering self compiles highlights and impressions, and those memories determine future choices. When we decide where to vacation, what career to pursue, or whether to repeat an experience, we consult memory, not lived feeling. As a result, we may choose what looks good in retrospect rather than what truly feels good while it happens. He illustrates this with the example of listening to a symphony. If a recording ends with a loud scratch, the memory of the entire piece is spoiled. The music itself, an hour of beauty, was not ruined for the experiencing self, which heard it moment by moment. But the remembering self, which stores only the story of the event, declares the experience ruined. In this way, memory overrules reality. Kahneman extends this idea to broader measures of happiness. Surveys show that momentary well-being and life satisfaction often diverge. People with higher incomes, for instance, believe they are happier, but when tracked through daily experiences, their emotional lives are no better than those of people with moderate incomes. The remembering self values status, achievement, and narrative coherence. The experiencing self values comfort, connection, and peace. We spend much of life serving the remembering self's need for a story of success, while neglecting the experiencing self's simple demand for pleasant moments. He argues that this split explains many paradoxes of human behavior. We chase long-term goals that make our days stressful, then remember the journey as meaningful. We prefer to repeat experiences that we remember fondly, even if they were unpleasant in the moment. The remembering self values endings; it seeks closure and purpose. The experiencing self values flow; it seeks harmony and presence. Kahneman notes that duration neglect, our tendency to ignore how long an experience lasts, undermines rational decision-making about well-being. We can suffer for months or years, yet remember only the ending. This explains why people endure long hardships for brief moments of triumph. The story matters more than the lived time. He also points out that the two selves use different metrics of happiness. The experiencing self measures happiness as the frequency and intensity of positive feelings. The remembering self measures it as life satisfaction, a cognitive judgment based on comparison, narrative, and ideals. The two are loosely correlated but not the same. You can live a pleasant life that you remember poorly, or a difficult life that you recall proudly. Kahneman concludes the chapter by observing that the remembering self writes the autobiography of our lives, and that story defines who we think we are. Yet the experiencing self is the one who actually lives those moments. The tragedy of human existence, he suggests, is that we often sacrifice the quality of experience for the sake of the story we will later tell. The essential lesson is both humbling and practical. The self that decides is not the self that feels. To live wisely, we must recognize which one we are serving, and ask whether the story we are building is worth the moments we are losing. Kahneman deepens his exploration of the two selves by focusing on how the remembering self transforms experience into narrative. Human beings, he explains, are not recorders of reality, but storytellers who edit, simplify, and assign meaning to life's flow. We live countless moments, but memory preserves only a few. Those fragments are stitched together into the illusion of a coherent story. This storytelling function shapes how we judge our lives, make choices, and even define who we are. The remembering self values structure and significance more than the raw quantity of pleasure or pain. It seeks beginnings, climaxes, and endings, the grammar of narrative. A life that makes sense in retrospect feels satisfying even if it contained long stretches of struggle. This explains why people recall painful experiences as meaningful and why they pursue challenges that make for good stories rather than comfortable moments. We want not only to live, but to remember living well. Kahneman describes how the brain's memory system enforces this narrative bias. Most of our experiences vanish immediately. What remains are snapshots marked by emotional intensity and transitions. Stability fades, change endures. The mind cares more about how an experience ends than how long it lasted, and more about dramatic highs and lows than about average states. The story of a life, therefore, is not the sum of its moments, but the sum of its most memorable moments. He notes that this bias leads to systematic distortions in how we pursue happiness. We favor experiences that yield good memories over those that produce continuous well-being. Vacations, for example, are often chosen for the photos they will generate, the symbolic record of happiness, rather than for the daily pleasure they will actually provide. The act of anticipating and remembering the trip brings more satisfaction than many of its lived moments. The same pattern governs careers, relationships, and achievements. We chase stories we can be proud of rather than experiences that feel good while they unfold. This narrative orientation explains the power of endings. The conclusion of an experience, whether a relationship, a project, or a life stage, redefines the whole sequence. A painful endeavor with a triumphant end is remembered positively. A pleasant journey with a bitter end is remembered negatively. In memory, the last chapter rewrites the rest. This is why we prefer painful ordeals that end well to pleasant ones that fade into frustration. The remembering self edits reality for coherence and redemption, not for accuracy. Kahneman connects this tendency to moral and cultural narratives. Societies, like individuals, construct collective stories that emphasize meaning over fact. Nations remember wars not as a sequence of horrors, but as episodes of heroism or sacrifice. Families remember ancestors through selective anecdotes that affirm identity. This is the same psychological mechanism at work on the personal level. We impose meaning to make chaos tolerable. He warns that the remembering self's control over decisions can distort our priorities. Because it dominates reflection and planning, we often make choices that improve the story but worsen the experience. We work excessively to achieve outcomes that look good in retrospect. Promotions, awards, milestones, while ignoring the quality of our daily emotional life. The remembering self demands achievements that the experiencing self must suffer to provide. Kahneman observes that the conflict between the two selves mirrors ancient philosophical tensions between eudaimonia, a life of meaning, and hedonism, a life of pleasure. Modern psychology, he suggests, shows that both are real but distinct dimensions of well-being. The good life may not be the same as the happy life. Some people prefer the drama of a meaningful narrative to the calm of a pleasant existence. He proposes that true self-understanding requires asking not, "Am I happy?" but, "Do I like the story I'm telling about my life? And how does that story feel while I'm living it?" Balancing the storyteller and the experiencer is the art of wisdom. Kahneman ends the chapter with a poignant reflection. We live in time, but think in stories. The remembering self demands meaning, the experiencing self demands peace, and we must learn to honor both. The challenge of life, he writes, is to ensure that the tale we tell ourselves is not built entirely at the expense of the moments that compose it. Kahneman turns from theory to evidence, examining what research reveals about experienced well-being, how people actually feel from moment to moment, as distinct from how satisfied they believe they are with their lives. Using large data sets and daily experience sampling, he shows that happiness is shaped far more by attention, social connection, and daily routine than by income, success, or status. What matters most to the experiencing self is not what we have, but what we focus on while we live. He begins by describing the day reconstruction method, a tool he helped develop with colleagues to measure real-time emotion. Participants record the previous day in episodes, commuting, working, eating, relaxing, and rate how they felt during each. This method bypasses memory's distortions by capturing affect close to the experience itself. The results revealed a pattern both obvious and startling. People's emotional lives are dominated by small, repetitive events, not by major achievements or failures. From these data, Kahneman concludes that happiness depends less on circumstances than on how attention is allocated. When minds wander to unpleasant thoughts, mood declines. When attention rests on engaging, social, or enjoyable activities, mood rises. The experiencing self lives in the present, and its quality depends on what occupies consciousness at any given time. Wealth and success matter only insofar as they change daily experience, and beyond a certain point, they hardly do. He revisits the famous finding that money improves life satisfaction, but not experienced well-being beyond moderate income levels. While richer people report higher overall satisfaction when asked to evaluate their lives, they do not experience more daily joy. The reason, Kahneman explains, is attention misallocation. Wealth changes what we think about, not how we feel. It directs focus toward goals, possessions, and comparisons, concerns that often diminish immediate pleasure. The mind of the affluent is filled with abstractions. The mind of the happy is absorbed in the moment. He emphasizes that context and relationships outweigh income in determining daily mood. Being with friends, family, or loved ones consistently ranks among the most positive experiences, while commuting, working under pressure, or being alone are among the most negative. Human beings are social creatures, and the experiencing self measures well-being largely through connection and belonging. Loneliness, by contrast, is one of the strongest predictors of unhappiness and poor health. Kahneman discusses how adaptation shapes emotion. Good and bad circumstances lose their emotional force as people adjust. New pleasures become normal, new pains fade. The mind quickly resets its baseline, a process he calls the focusing illusion, the tendency to exaggerate the impact of any single factor on happiness. People believe moving to a sunny climate or buying a larger house will transform their well-being, but once the novelty fades, attention shifts to routine irritations, and happiness returns to its prior level. He also points out that negative emotions weigh more heavily on experience than positive ones. Because of the brain's bias toward bad events, a few moments of frustration or conflict can outweigh long periods of calm. This asymmetry explains why reducing misery through rest, companionship, or meaningful work is often more effective than pursuing pleasure. In the calculus of the experiencing self, avoiding pain counts more than increasing joy. Kahneman introduces the concept of attention as a limited resource. Whatever occupies the mind shapes the emotional tone of existence. When attention is captured by worries or comparisons, life feels impoverished, regardless of comfort or wealth. When it is anchored in meaningful activity, pleasure arises naturally. The challenge, then, is not to change circumstances, but to control attention, to notice what is good while it happens. He contrasts this with the remembering self, which judges life globally and retrospectively. It cares about goals achieved and stories told, not about the countless neutral or mildly pleasant hours that make up real life. The two selves often disagree. The remembering self seeks status and narrative meaning, while the experiencing self seeks flow and simplicity. Kahneman's conclusion is practical and humane. Well-being improves when people reduce negative experiences rather than chase extraordinary ones. Sleep, health, freedom from chronic stress, and close relationships contribute more to happiness than wealth or fame. The path to a better life lies in shaping daily experience, not in constructing a grand story. He ends with a succinct observation that captures the entire book's spirit. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. The quality of attention defines the quality of life. To be happier, we must train the mind not to crave more but to dwell better. Kahneman closes, thinking fast and slow by bringing together the lessons of his lifelong research. The mind that judges and remembers life is not the same as the one that actually lives it. Our sense of happiness, morality, and even identity depends less on what happens to us than on how we think about what happens. On the stories, comparisons, and frames through which memory and reasoning transform experience into meaning. He begins by contrasting experienced well-being and life satisfaction, the twin measures of happiness that reflect the two selves. Experienced well-being refers to the feelings of the present moment, the comfort, engagement, or distress of the experiencing self. Life satisfaction, in contrast, is a reflective judgment by the remembering self, an evaluation of how one's life story measures up to ideals and expectations. People can score high on one and low on the other. Someone might feel miserable day to day, yet believe their life is meaningful, or enjoy a pleasant daily existence yet regard it as unimportant. This divergence reveals the final illusion Kahneman wants to expose. The focusing illusion, the tendency to exaggerate the importance of whatever we are currently thinking about. When asked how happy they are, people unconsciously focus on a salient factor, their income, health, marriage, or weather, and treat it as decisive, even though its real effect on daily mood is small. Nothing in life, Kahneman writes, is as important as you think it is while you are thinking about it. This principle applies not only to happiness, but to all judgment. Our minds magnify whatever occupies attention and ignore the rest. He illustrates this with research on income and happiness. People believe that richer individuals are significantly happier, and within countries they often are, but only slightly, and mainly because wealth correlates with life satisfaction, not with daily joy. Once basic needs are met, money stops improving emotional experience. However, because money is easy to compare, it dominates memory and imagination. When asked to think about happiness, we recall what can be measured, not what is felt. Thus, we mistake life satisfaction for happiness because the remembering self speaks louder than the experiencing one. Kahneman observes that modern society rewards the remembering self. It values achievement, narrative, and status. Our goals, careers, possessions, reputations, are all designed to enrich the story of life rather than its texture. The experiencing self, which lives quietly in the present, has no voice in public success. This imbalance makes many lives look successful yet feel hollow. He points out that the conflict between the two selves is not easily resolved. The remembering self governs choice because it anticipates how we will remember our decisions. It seeks pride, coherence, and meaning. The experiencing self, concerned only with the present, lacks long-term perspective. Kahneman does not argue that one self is truer than the other, but that wisdom lies in recognizing their difference. We must decide deliberately which self to serve in each domain of life, whether to pursue experiences that feel good or stories that sound good. He links this insight back to his broader theme of System 1 and System 2. The remembering self is a storyteller constructed by System 1, fast, intuitive, emotional, and eager for coherence. The experiencing self corresponds to the quiet perception of the present moment, accessible only when System 2 slows down thought. The interplay between the two systems and between the two selves defines the drama of consciousness itself. Kahneman closes with reflections on policy and ethics. If the goal of society is to increase well-being, should we focus on life satisfaction or experienced happiness? Governments measure success by economic growth and self-reported satisfaction, yet these may not reflect lived happiness. Policies that reduce suffering by improving health, security, and freedom may benefit the experiencing self more than those that raise income or status. The challenge is to create conditions in which both selves can thrive, lives that feel good to live and look good to remember. In his final pages, Kahneman returns to humility. The biases and illusions he has described are not flaws we can eliminate, but features of the human mind. We cannot stop framing, storytelling, or focusing on what stands before us, but we can become aware of these tendencies and gently correct them. Awareness does not perfect judgment, but it softens error. He ends with a quiet, philosophical insight that echoes through the whole work. The mind is a machine for constructing stories, and those stories, not raw experience, are what we call life. To think well is to understand how those stories are made, to notice when they mislead us, and to live, if only briefly, aware of the difference between what happens and what we remember. Thank you for watching until the end. If you want to go deep down into the rabbit hole of marketing and persuasion, click the link in the description where you will find many fundamental books about copywriting, psychology, and persuasion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. See you in the next one.